Good evening, everyone. If you can find a seat, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Jenna Weiss, and I'm the Associate Director of Public Programs at the Jewish Museum. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the final Unpacking the Book, Jewish Writers in Conversation of the season. Tonight's talk, The Ghosts Among Us, Exploring Family Secrets Through Fiction, featuring authors Iddo Gefen and Stuart Nadler in conversation with Stephanie Butnick, is co-presented with the Jewish Book Council and our media partner Golda Guide. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank collaborators at both organizations for all their work on tonight's program and the whole season. We would also like to thank the Rita J. and Stanley H. Kaplan Foundation, whose generous endowment support makes the Saul and Gladys Gortzman Lecture possible each year. There are still a number of public programs coming up this month related to our current exhibition, The Book of Esther in the Age of Rembrandt, including a conversation with curator Abigail Rappaport and Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik on Wednesday, May 21st at 6:30 p.m., and on Thursday, May 29th at 6:30 p.m., a panel discussion focusing on depictions of biblical women in Rembrandt's time. As always, you can watch recordings of our many past Jewish Book Council programs on their YouTube channel. And for complete details on all of our upcoming events, please visit the Jewish Museum's website to sign up for our e-news. Now I'd like to welcome Naomi Firestone Teeter, CEO of Jewish Book Council, to tell you a little bit more about tonight's talk.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Jenna. As always, I'm so pleased to be able to welcome you on behalf of Jewish Book Council. We're thrilled to present Unpacking the Book for its 11th year in partnership with the Jewish Museum, and this year with Golda, your Jewish lifestyle guide. Each program we've offered in the series brings together authors who approach similar subject matter through a unique lens. Tonight, we'll be diving into a conversation about the secrets families keep from each other, secrets kept with the best intentions, and the consequences of those secrets, good and bad, with authors Stuart Nadler and Iddo Gefen, authors of Rooms for Vanishing and Mrs. Lillenbloom's Cloud Factory, respectively, and moderated by writer and podcast host Stephanie Butnick. Tonight's conversation is a meaningful addition to our work at Jewish Book Council of educating, enriching, and strengthening the community through Jewish literature. Cultivating a thriving Jewish literary landscape has always been a priority for us, and we're proud that through our efforts this past year, we were able to share the world of Jewish literature and ideas with a record number of readers, nearly 800,000. Doing our work well means ensuring that writers feel encouraged and supported in their work, that publishers have the tools to acquire Jewish books, that bookstores and Jewish institutions have the resources they need to create engaging literary opportunities for their communities, and that curious readers find the stories that move them. To learn more about all of our efforts to find reviews, essays, and our book club resources, to learn about our author tours, our literary journal, Paper Brigade, and our literary awards, including the National Jewish Book Awards, I hope you'll visit our website and even become a member to support all of our work to uplift and celebrate Jewish voices and stories. Before I pass things over to Stephanie, I'd like to very quickly thank the Jewish Museum and, of course, Jenna Weiss, and our amazing media sponsor, Golda. A very special thank you as well to Evie Sapphire Bernstein, Jewish Book Council's program director, who managed all the ins and outs of this program. And, of course, I'm especially grateful to JBC's board of directors for their continued support of Jewish literature, ideas, and conversation. Finally, you'll have the opportunity to purchase both of our panelists' books tonight, a very important part of supporting authors in our community, and you can get them signed right over here following tonight's program. And now I'd like to introduce you to Stephanie. Stephanie Butnick is the founder of Golda, a Jewish lifestyle newsletter that brings you everything you need to live Jewishly today. If her voice sounds familiar, it's because she hosted the hit podcast Unorthodox from Tablet Magazine for nearly a decade. Stephanie is the author of the newest Jewish encyclopedia, From Abraham to Zabars and Everything in Between. Thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy the evening. Over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Naomi and Jenna and Evie and everyone at the Jewish Museum and the Jewish Book Council. I don't know if you guys had the chance to check out the exhibit here. It is amazing. It's really unbelievable, so come back. or try to sneak in during this. Actually, don't. I'm going to get in trouble. But we are here with two fabulous authors, and the theme tonight is Ghosts Among Us, exploring family secrets through fiction. I had this idea that we should all start like writing down our family secrets on the little note cards, but maybe we won't do that. We'll see how it goes. And we're going to be talking about the secrets families keep from each other to keep everyone together and the consequences these secrets can have. As I said, I have two fantastic authors joining me tonight, and their two books give us a lot to talk about. Stuart Nadler, to my left, is the author of a short story collection and 3 novels, most recently Rooms for Vanishing, right here, which I'll show you, which we'll be discussing tonight. His previous novel, The Inseparables, was named a Best Book of the Year by Kirkus and was a finalist for the Mark Twain Prize for the American Voice. He is a recipient of the 5 Under 35 Award from the National Book Foundation. Iddo Gefen was born in Tel Aviv and is currently based in New York City. His debut book, Jerusalem Beach, earned the prestigious 2023 Sami Rohr Prize for Jewish Literature. His new novel is Mrs. Lillian Bloom's Cloud Factory. And in his spare time, which we will get to, he is a Ph.D. student in, let me see if I get this right, cognitive psychology at Columbia University and the Zuckerman Institute for Neuroscience. And his research explores, wait for it, the intricate relationship between narrative understanding, I can't even say it right, between narrative understanding, human memory, and decision making. So we have like some real underachievers up here. So yeah, let's give him a round of applause. I feel like that warrants it. So, as Naomi said, both of these books are fantastic. They're for sale over there, and then the authors will be signing them here. So you like, after this, you walk there, then you sort of like come back around here. Everyone goes home happy. And we're gonna chat for a little bit, and then you guys all have cards on your chairs, note cards, and some of the JBC and Jewish Museum staff will be coming around with little pencils during the event. So if you have questions, write them down. We'll get to them at the end. Let's start by me just like asking you what these books are about. Before everyone goes to buy them, I feel like they should know a little bit more. And actually, before we do any of that, I want to break some Hollywood news, if that's okay here. Because one of the stories in your last book, Jerusalem Beach, is actually being adapted into a film, right? Like, are we breaking, is this? I read it in Deadline, so it's real and it's big. So tell us about that.
I wrote a book, Jerusalem Beach, that one of the stories is now adapted to a movie by Charlie Kaufman, and it's going to be a full movie, which I have to say, as somebody that was in Tel Aviv when the deal was signed, it took like a few years ago, I never imagined something like that could happen, so it's really exciting. And yeah, Ryan Gosling is one of the producers, and I hope it will turn out good.
I think it will. So everyone here tonight think like adaptation for these books. We'll like manifest that into the world for these latest projects. I think we can do it. We have a lot of people here. But yes, let's start with these new books. Stuart, kick us off. Tell us a little bit about Rooms for Vanishing.
Rooms for Vanishing follows the Alterman family, a Jewish family from Vienna after the war. They are splintered apart. The general conceit of this book is that in each section of this book, the narrator either is the only person who has survived or believes himself to be the only person who has survived. So there's 4 members of the family, and so there's these sort of 4 interlocking parts of this novel. It's set all across the world. It takes place in London, Montreal, see if I can remember, New York, Vienna, Prague. So yeah, all across the world.
They're going to ask you that before the adaptation, so you should like get that down.
Yeah, and so this book is kind of invested in this question of ghosts and memory and hauntings, and sort of what these. The book is asking the question of like, what is that voice that we're often hearing from those who have left us, and at what point does that sort of does our grief become a kind of form of madness? And this is a kind of like a question that I think has was personally interesting to me, and I think was like socially interesting to the type of story I was interested in writing, which is like a kind of book in the shadow of the Holocaust.
Iddo?
Yeah, so Mrs. Lillian Bloom's Cloud Factory is a book that, in its heart, it's about a relationship between a mother and her 21-year-old son. And the son in the story is, in many ways, the perfect kid that never wants to rebel. And his mother, the only thing she wants to is rebel and not be a mother in a full time. And it's also a very bad mystery book, because the mystery in the story is that the mother, Sarai, disappears, but in the first page of the book, we find her. And we find her in the middle of the desert in Israel with a glass of martini, completely happy. But she's not telling where she's been or when she went. And the family tries to go back into normality, but soon they understand that without figuring out what happened in these 3 days, nothing will be back to normal. And a lot of things happened between them. The fact that she found herself starting a startup company, which in Israel it feels like every person has tried to do so. And they find themselves a family living in the desert in Israel, far away from Tel Aviv, trying to create a startup company with not any knowledge of how to do such a thing. And in many ways, I think this story deals with this, I think, tension between one's dreams and desires, and then being still part of a family and a community, and the responsibility you have and the roles you have in life that are beyond your own dreams, and it goes from there.
Iddo, there's a passage, I think, in the first or second page of your book that I have not been able to get out of my head. I'm going to read it back to you and to all of you. You're describing Eli, this son, and you write that as a child he often felt gripped by the strangest notion that there were places erected only moments before the first visitors arrived, that half an hour prior, in what appeared to be a small Tuscan town, someone would announce, "Let's go, guys, build a few houses, a road, and a vineyard at a storage. They'll be here any minute." And lickety-split, all the extras will be bussed in to take their positions, walking up and down the streets casual and confident, as if the town had been standing there since time immemorial. It's very eerie and profound, and it sort of has that like Blazing Saddles feel of just like a fake, sort of a conjured universe. But I guess I want to know what that means, this idea of like creation out of nothing, and the sort of like the startup that happens too here, right? This idea that she's turning, you could sort of talk a little bit more about that, but sort of creating something out of nothing, the beauty of that, and then also sort of like the farce in some ways.
Yeah, totally. First of all, I have to say, like, I wrote this before I was in Tuscany, and like a few months ago, I was there and I checked, and it's real. But really, I think like I'm really passionate about the idea of like creation in general, and like also in my research in neuroscience, I'm really passionate about like how narratives shape our memory and understanding. And I think the thing I don't feel science has like tools to understand it is how the first idea of a story is implanted in your head. And for me, it's like always this like mystery of like, for this book, for example, I just had the idea of a woman in the middle of the desert with a glass of martini, and I'm like, okay, I need to write that. But it's really, in a way, I think there's something about like always creating something out of nothing, in a sense, that for me, it's the thing that I'm most passionate about in my writing. Like, to be honest, if I could only write opening lines of stories and not the rest, that would be perfect. Because I feel the rest, like the editing and all the other parts, it's like hard for me. Again, like in the end of the day, I think there's something about like literature that is like trying to just sometimes I feel it's just like absurd, the fact that we're, I don't know, exploring these worlds that don't really exist. And sometimes it makes me wonder if the reality we're in is actually more like weird than we think. And I think that's the beginning of the book refers to that.
And Stuart, that really reminds me of your book, where these characters are traumatized by all sorts of historical events, specifically the Holocaust, but they don't quite know if like their reality is real. And so that seems like this like panic-inducing uncertainty that they're all working through separately.
Right. What you were just saying is something that one of the things, like the predominating obsessions I have, right, which is like the way that narrative ends up changing the stories we tell ourselves, like the important stories, the way that like narrative changes our understanding of history. I'm a college professor. I'm often in a classroom like drawing the shape of stories on a chalkboard. You know, this conventional ways that we understand narrative and like the demands that narrative puts on the story you're telling, right? Like that it has a beginning and that it has a middle, and at the end we have to kind of resolve or have a moment of redemption. And I was kind of asking myself this question of like, what happens when we like superimpose that idea onto history, right? Like, you know, so much narrative art made about cataclysm or war, and the ends of those stories end up having to kind of like, you know, reform themselves because of that demand. Like you have a war movie or a movie about the Holocaust, and the end has to end on a note of redemption, even if the history offers no hope for being redeemed. And I just started thinking like, there is a consequence to this, obviously, like generation after generation. If this like kind of, if these forces start like distilling themselves down, then the stories we tell ourselves end up like bearing no resemblance to what's happened. And that reminded me of the way it feels like to grieve, right? Where you're just like kind of replaying that same memory of somebody, and that memory gets used, and we, you know, we have different names for whatever that sensation is when you feel somebody near you that's passed, you know, a haunting or a visitation or a ghost or whatever. And that feeling of honoring that voice is a kind of madness that we're like acculturated to. And so like that was the thing I was really fascinated to try to experiment with in this book, which is like squish all these stories together to try to make a new shape for myself that felt where I was trying to explore these things that I'm interested in, you know, history or, you know, the sort of like kind of the stories that we tell ourselves as Jews, but in a way that did not feel like it had to perform this kind of fake redemption.
Yeah, like I felt like reading your beautiful book that there was something so interesting there in the fact of like, what is the story we tell ourselves about trauma and what actually happened and what is more important. And sometimes the story is more important than the events themselves. And like my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, and he had like a brother. They both survived the Holocaust together. And sometimes I would go to my grandfather in Jerusalem, and his brother would tell stories about their time in the Holocaust. And he was like an amazing storyteller, much better than I am. And he would like tell these stories of how they like almost were killed in all kinds of events. And I remember one time that my grandfather like stopped him in the middle of the story and said like, Joseph, listen, don't take this the wrong way. It's a beautiful story, really interesting. There's only one problem. I was there. It did not happen. And then, like, his brother thought for a second. He said, like, yeah, but that's how it should have happened. And I think, like, I feel in my family, in many ways, that the stories are a lot of the times more important than the facts themselves. And it's also a very dangerous thing when you don't address the facts. But I think, like, a lot of the way, like, our personal narratives and family narratives are created by this, like, myth and story that are detached in some ways from the events that truly happen. And I think in your book, it's like a really beautiful example of like how people perceive the story in their life.
You know, Stuart, in your book, you have this idea of like the woman flying over her life. And that's sort of something that's also been stuck with me, this idea. I mean, I will let you explain it, but just this, like, what does it mean to live versus watching your life unfold? Go.
Yeah, something I'm often talking about in therapy. I don't know. I mean, like, this like.
Do you want to lie down? We could get comfortable. We could do, you know. Have some
I have no answer to it. Like, I've heard that being present is like a theoretical possibility. But yeah. And so in my novel, one of my narrators is remembering the story that her mother told her, or she thinks she's remembering the story of like a woman who's like flying over her life. And yeah, I don't know where I had that image, but you know, like very often when I used to live here when I was younger, every time I come back to New York, even this evening walking up to this museum, I'm like kind of just walking through all the various lives I had that, you know, when I lived here, you know, the version of me at 19, at 24, 34, and all of that, you know, that sensation is always such a vivid sensation for me. Yeah, and it's just, I feel like I'm somebody that has a very peculiar memory. I've tried to like make use of this memory in some way. Like I went on Jeopardy, I lost really badly. So like that wasn't the way to do.
Is that clip online? Could we find that clip?
You can find a picture of me with Alex
Stuart
Trebek,
Nadler plus Jeopardy, what year was it? Just help us.
2005 maybe.
2005, later.
Pre-HD, so like no reruns. But yeah, like that sensation to me of being able to kind of like exist in multiple places at once felt really interesting. But I finished this book in the pandemic, and it was the case that like at that moment, everybody was writing these stories about like multiverse, like the multiverse, like existing in multiple, like their lives existing in multiple realities. And it made lots of sense to me, right? We were like stuck in this terrible situation. Like, well, of course people want to invent a technology where they're like not living in the reality that we're living in, which is like pretty bad. And then I thought like, well, the Jewish version of that is like really specific, right? Like this is a thing that like Jews have been asking themselves forever. Like, would it be any different if we were living in any other reality, right? Like this is a kind of like 1,000-year-old question. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's an answer, but like the woman flying over felt like a kind of way to combine all of it, right? Like therapy, Jeopardy, here tonight, yeah, all of it.
You know, you mentioned going back thousands of years, and that's what's so interesting about Sarai, this matriarch, her invention, which is, someone describes it as like Moses striking water from the rock. Like she's basically making rain out of sand, and it's sort of this like godlike thing that she's able to do, that she's sort of conjured. And so I guess I want you to tell us a little bit about about Cloudies, about this startup, where we can invest in it, and just this idea of like that elusive, essential dream of water in the desert.
Yeah, like after the book was published, it was originally written and published in Hebrew. Like I got an email from somebody like, want to invest in your company, and I'm like, I'm a writer.
To the end?
Yeah, but in many ways, like I think Sarai, her character, is somebody that is in the right and the wrong place in the same time, in the sense that she's a robotic teacher. She loves inventing stuff. So in a sense, she's like the perfect person for the startup nation. But then again, she doesn't know how to use her email. She doesn't like to use social media. Like she's so far away from it. And I think like I was really curious of playing with this idea of like somebody that likes to invent but doesn't want to do it for like selling a startup in like $1 million, but just like doing it for the sake of invention itself. And the Cloud Factory, it's really an idea that came to me like, as I told you, I had this like idea of somebody, a woman being found in the middle of the desert, completely happy, and then I said, okay, I need to go to that desert and see what's going on. And I went to Mitzpe in Israel, and went there for 3 weeks to like see the world and discover like the story.
Can you describe what it's like there? Because it is wild if you've
Yeah, so it's like, I love it. It's like a wild place in in like the middle of the desert in Israel, next to a crater, and it's really like you can find both like you can find both like hippies and both people that are religious, and like you can find all of Israel in like a really small town, and you also find a lot of like camels and stuff like that. And like just to describe you the vibe of the place, I came there and like I started going around through places, and I told them like, I'm thinking of writing like a novel about this place, and somebody told me like, oh, you're here for the landing on Mars, and I'm like, what? And apparently, like just a year before I came, they tried to see how it would look to land in Mars. So they just took like a few people from the community with scientists, put them in the middle of the desert, and in the first day, the food didn't arrive, so they ordered pizza to their like mission in space. And it's really like this Israeli inventions and creativity, but both like not knowing at all what you're doing. And I think like Sarai's invention was like creating from sand like clouds. She just like had this invention and created, but then she doesn't know how to control it or even how to do it again. And I think in many ways for me, it's very similar to the experience of writing. Like sometimes I got a good part of idea, and then like I have no clue of like how to continue it. So for me, it's always this like balance between like inventing something and then like not knowing what to do with it. And the Cloud Factor in many ways is that story of it.
And there's this tension or not between Judaism and entrepreneurship, and sort of depending on where you fall, and different characters fall in different places. So I guess I wanted to ask you if Judaism is, as you write, or as one character says, about learning for the sake of learning, inventing for the sake of inventing, or if Abraham was truly the original startup founder, as another character posits.
Yeah, so it's actually like, there's a part in the book that there's like this Jewish startup conference in Tel Aviv, and like there's like 3 people talking in these like slogans about how like, of course, Judaism is filled with like startup ideas and like stuff that honestly, like I was like, in my family, it wasn't part of the culture. And like Sarai in the story was like, no, it's just about like inventing or learning for the sake of learning. And for me, I think in many ways it's both. Like, and my experience in Israel is seeing people that some of them, like, I don't know if like you know the term exit. Have you ever like heard of the phrase? But it means like in Israel, exit would be like, it's not like literally going out of a place, it's like selling a company for a lot of money. So it's like selling Waze for Google for a lot of money. And if you ask like 10 of my friends, 8 would say like, my dream in life is doing an exit. It doesn't matter if they're in the tech industry or not. Like I have a friend who's a teacher and his dream is like having an exit and going, I don't know how he'll do it, I don't want to tell him that. But in many ways, I feel like there's always this tension that like, and I feel also with my creative process and my Jewish identity also, that in my one way, I just want to like read and explore and do whatever I want for my own sake. But then there's the real world, and I don't know, like when you're a writer, you also need to make a living, for example. Like I'm also doing a Ph.D. in neuroscience, so I'm supposed to tell you the reason I'm doing it is because like I believe in the connection between the brain and writing, and it is true, but the real reason is because my parents told me I need a real job, and that like their fears were definitely like a main factor in my decisions. And I think, so that's something that really came to my writing. And by the way, I feel like in your book, in many ways, that there's also this thing of like family trauma passing like generation by generation, and like making one like create stuff that they didn't expect.
Yeah, I'm always like asking myself that question about like when I'm alone in the room making it, which is basically my whole life, right? Like where's reality at that point, you know, like, which is why it's so wonderful to come to a room like this and to see all of you, because then it like seems real, because like so much of the process is really this place of delusion, which is very similar to startup culture, right? Where like there is going to be this moment in the future where everybody is using the thing I make, right? But then you like go out with your book and it's like, you know, there's like 7 people at the bookstore, and that's the kind of like oblivion you're dealing with. And like I teach young writers, and often like when I talk about literature and I try to like evangelize for its utility and its like beauty, I feel like I'm like talking about being like a scrimshaw artist or something, right? Like that the novel is this like super antique technology that like they're just like, we're just here for the credits. So like, you know, it's but yeah, that like the line, so much of the creative act of making a novel, like the stamina involved, like just the privation, is this like kind of really estranging experience of like solitude and like living with this imagination, you know, like cultivating the imaginary friends, trying to sell those friends for money. It's it's a very odd thing that we do. It's very odd.
We should also mention that Stuart is not on any social media, so which is very impressive. Speaking of like old-fashioned things that your students probably can't understand at all.
Yeah.
But you're not on social media, but there is this technological element in your book where DNA testing comes into play. Yeah. And so people who, like the idea that you might literally never be connected to someone is sort of out the window now, because just one ping on your email, all of a sudden you're reconnected to someone. So it you know, they reconnect, and I think one of the characters says like, all I know is that I am here and you are here, and this seems to me a great miracle.
Yeah.
And so this idea that technology can bring people, I mean, the successfulness we can, you have to buy the book to find out, but technology does sort of change the game a little bit in these family stories where people seem to think they're long lost and never getting back in touch.
Yeah, I did my family genealogy in the middle of this. I grew up in this family and nobody would ever tell me anything about where we came from. As far as they understood, we were just made in Boston, and that was that. I live in Boston, and that's all all anybody could tell me. And when I did that DNA test, I don't know if any of you have done that.
Can we do a show of hands? I feel like a lot of us have done this.
Oh, good for you guys.
And who now kind of regrets it?
Yeah.
We're like, what's out there?
Because they're just going to use that shit for
yeah.
something bad. But that thing that came back where it was here are 15,000 of your distant cousins. I was like, oh, it's the entire diaspora, what am I supposed to do with this? It's this is your 7th cousin. You can see her picture. She lives in, Cape Town. She looks pleasant. I'm like, am I supposed to reach out to you and be like, oh, can we hang out or whatever? There's this little disclaimer at the bottom of it too. That's we could be totally wrong.
Okay.
And that felt
I actually
really.
didn't notice that.
The storyteller in me was well, that's the story, obviously, right? These characters are searching for one another, and so this, this man in my novel is 100 years old. He's contacted by this woman who says that she's his child, who he gave up and put on the kinder transport, and the novel doesn't really answer the question of who's writing him, which seemed that seemed to me to echo the experience I was having using that technology. I'm I guess I did send you my spit in a tube, and you're purporting to tell me everything about my history or whatever, but but there was some part of me that was I don't know if I believe any of this. I'm sitting in a lot of doubt about this experience.
I'm about to get married in a few months, and now I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah, we'll clap for that.
No, I'm concerned about doing this test because then I feel my parents would want to invite 1,000 people. I feel sometimes they invent cousins, so this would be
Yeah, you cannot do that before a wedding. No. We have a strict guest list, and then we find the rest of our relatives.
But I discovered that my mother's family and my father's family were from shtetls that were really close to one another, a very easy horse ride or whatever. And I was oh God, I'm going to discover that they're cousins, and that's going to explain everything about me and my choices in my life. And but that wasn't the case.
I just want to remind everyone that you can write your own questions, and I think pencils will be going around. But speaking of identity, Iddo Gefen, I have to ask you. I saw on Instagram, Niddo is what your Starbucks name is?
Yeah, whenever I go to a Starbucks place, I'm insisting on saying my name is Iddo, although a lot of Israelis call themselves John or something. And today they call me Niddo, so
which I like.
Yeah.
So
it's a nice name.
So I have to ask you the question of what has your experience been as an Israeli writer in the US? You are studying at Columbia. Just give us the whole thing. The people do want to know.
Yeah, definitely. So I can say I came here 2.5 years ago, and I was always in my life a writer. And when I came here, I suddenly became an Israeli writer. And I understood I'm a fish not in the water. I'm in a different place now. And I think it makes everything different in the sense also how people read me. And also my experience. I think as I think all of you know, since October 7 and in general, it's a very different world. And I think the Jewish and Israeli identity is something that I see more and more people asking themselves what is their place in these big stories, communities, are we a part of it or not? And it also defines me in the daily life. Being in Colombia, of course, it's a place that a lot is happening, and my Israeliness, when I was in Israel, I always thought I'm a citizen of the world, and I would be any place I'll go, nobody will notice, and people notice in a second. I go through Colombia, and there's the Chabad people that do you want to put tefillin? How do you know I'm Israel? We just know. So my identity is so embedded in my Israeliness, and I feel it does create some interactions with people that are sometimes complex, because honestly, like, I'll be very honest with you, as a writer, I would like people to read me regardless of the place and just read my book. But I think in the world we're in, it is a big factor, and there's people that it will be more hard for them in this point of time of reading an Israeli book. So again, it's something I'm dealing with on a daily basis, but I think one of the things I did understand being here 2.5 years is I cannot avoid my Israeliness, I cannot avoid my Jewishness, and I'm also like embracing it. It's such a big part of my life and of and that's what I am in the world, and I think that's also a place, like, I think there is I had people from Israel ask me in the past year, like, maybe just come back with everything coming in Colombia, and I think it's important now, actually more than ever, to have Israelis in those spaces, again, to bring a complex story with nuance, with people can have definitely criticism on Israel, on the Israeli government. I share some of the criticism myself, but I think like it's important to be engaged and show your story in the world, and now it's important more than ever.
That was a good answer. Thank you, Niddo. That was great.
Yeah, that's good. I'm gonna write like Niddo. In my next book. It's gonna be Niddo.
But, you know, the interesting thing is like this book is so great because it's so Israeli. You have this brilliant idea, this brilliant concept, this like wacky family trying to execute it. It's in the context of Startup Nation, and so to sort of to downplay the Israeliness of this book would be a disservice to it, because that's sort of. And I think people read it, and I feel like people throw around the Edgar Carrot, like people sort of say there's this, it's in this tradition of just like a very specific and fun and beautiful style of writing and thinking. And so that it makes me sad to think that the Israeliness of it would be something people would want to turn away from, or,
yeah.
or like a publisher, who knows, you know?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about it a lot, and I think it's much broader than that, just like Israeli. I think we're in a time in our world that we have like social media and stuff like that, that people need like in a sentence, what is this about? And they have these like very small boxes. Oh, this is an Israeli book. Okay, I understand everything. And really I think like the challenge of literature today, and like I don't know how you feel about it, but like writing something complex and nuanced in the world we're living here in the world of social media, it's complicated not just for Israeli writers, I think for everybody. I'm still not sure how to do it, to be honest, if you have like advice, but I think like that's a challenge literature should insist on doing, and I think literature in general does this like radical, it has this radical commitment to the story of the individual and the story of one person, and through that tell, or a family or a community, but through that tell something much bigger about life. And I think that's still something very meaningful when people are willing to read books that way.
Yes, it's hard. I think about this all the time, right? Because literature demands like a few very specific things of us, right? Of all of you, right? It demands your solitude, right? You know, we're asking you to like spend time with these stories in a way that is really like intimate, right? This technology works one-to-one. This is why it's so, you know, powerful to read the work of dead writers, right? Because they're, you know, you're experiencing their consciousness in a way that is like unfettered, right? So it demands your solitude and it demands your attention, and that is sort of like a vanishing resource these days. And then it also does something beautiful, right? Where it just like assumes the best of you, right? It is, if the work is really complicated, or if you're reading a writer that's really demanding, then that the assumption there is that you're capable of meeting that demand. And I find that to be a very beautiful enterprise. And yeah, it is. I have a lot of moments where I feel very like hopeless about the sort of life of readers. I spend a lot of time in classrooms with young college students, and I do have moments where I'm like, I don't know I don't know what the novel is going to look like. And that's the big question I ask myself. Like, what is a novel in 2025? What is it supposed to look like? Because we have all these other attractive alternatives that are really good, right? Like, is a novel supposed to look like TV? Because TV is really great. And it's like, you know, and And so the choice I've made is like, I feel very freed by this environment, even though there's lots of reasons not to, right? The sort of like ethnicizing pressure that gets put on us as Jewish writers, or the sort of like political scrim that gets put over our work, or just like the idea that we're writing to a bunch of people who cannot not be on their phone. Like this past weekend, I was at an event in Manchester, Vermont, I was telling you, and like midway through, I was with a bunch of other writers, and clearly we were like not engaging enough, and they were bored, and like several of the people just were like on their phones, and I couldn't do the professor thing, you know, where I'm like, I'm gonna write you.
Can you tell us where you were, what the scene was?
Oh sure, this is at an event called Booktopia, a lovely group, but we were at I was on the pulpit, I guess they call it, of a
they do.
Of a Baptist church, yeah, in front of a crucifix. Yeah, there was like a Bible, like a big Bible, and then the bookmark. I'm sure there's a name for that velvet bookmark that they use, but it did have a Star of David on it. So I like just took the bookmark and like put it on my lap.
But I think that's interesting that you're there presenting your book in that context, because like when I read it, it spoke like to my soul, because this idea, like, but it's still a great book, even if, you know, the Holocaust has not specifically touched your family, right? Well, and so I'm curious how those readers were interacting. It's the same idea of like, is it a Jewish book? Is it a Holocaust book? Is it just a book, right? Or a novel, I guess.
Yeah, the interesting thing about being in that like church was like this idea of like this kind of like, there's this assimilative idea over like that being the public space, right? Like it was a church, it's like a functioning church, but it had been like assimilated into the community and such that if you needed to have an event, that's where you would have your event, because that's like an American space. The same way that I was in the train today coming up from Boston, the conductor made an announcement on the overhead that we have a new pope and he's American. And I was like, well, I'm glad that we have a new pope, you know. But yeah, like, so the question, you know, this novel that I made is split up into all these pieces, and the pieces are talking to one another. And yeah, I did have this moment when I finished it where I was like, I went to my like bookshelves, my library, and I was like, does this resemble any of the books that I have read before? And like, you know, I'm stealing some structural stuff from other books, but you know, the moment where I had a scary moment where I was like, I guess no, the answer is no, so maybe the book is broken in some fundamental way. But that was kind of my project, I think, was just to try to find like a way of surprising myself to tell the story.
Yeah, we should have announced the new pope before we started. I'm sorry, everyone. I feel like everyone knew, right? This crowd knew. Before we get to audience questions, I sort of want to go back to this idea of like families and secrets that we started with, and ghosts, and what it means to deceive or simply be out of touch, like whether intentionally or not, be out of touch with our families. And you know, Iddo, at the end of the book, Eli admits that he like still doesn't really understand his family. Like they've been through this whole thing. He says like, I still don't understand the people that I'm closest with, and it makes me frustrated and sad. And so I guess I want to, if you could sort of impart some wisdom, both of you, no pressure, but like, what does it mean to be part of a family, a community, a unit, and go through something challenging? And how do we sort of piece it all back together? And will we ever really understand them?
That's a beautiful question. I wish I could have answered it in a good way, but like for me, in many ways, writing a book is always dealing with questions I do not have good answers to, and like if I have good answers, I stop writing in a sense. But I can say that also this is like my perspective of being here 2.5 years, and like as an Israeli, I grew up a lot on like American culture, like TV and movie, and there's something in the American culture that is very individual. At least that's how it was presented to me. And I was brought up in Israel thinking, okay, I feel the same way. Like I'm very individual in my dreams and thoughts and things like that. And more as the years go by, I understand that so much of my decisions in life are connected so deeply to my family. My grandfather chose to come to Israel and not to the US. That changed so much of the path of my family. My parents made decisions. I made decisions coming here and hopefully coming back to Israel. So I think in the end of the day, one of the things that I think just being aware that you're not really ever a singular person in the world, but you're always connected to this like much deeper relationship in a family, in a community. It's something that for me, I think, opened a lot of new ways of exploring the world and understanding what is really important. And in this book, for example, I think in many ways, like, it started as a book about, like, the most important thing is, like, accomplishing yourself and getting a startup and getting a lot of money. But in the end of the day, it's a lot about, like, the family relationships and what's really important in being in a family. And also, being in a family is doing a lot of stuff you don't really want. Like, I feel whenever I'm in Israel, like, I have so many, like, Shabbat dinners with cousins I never heard of, but I have to go. So there's always this tension, but again, I feel that this tension also creates life, in a sense, because it is this, you want to be individual, and you also want to be part of a group, and I think finding the way of doing those both is the way, like, for me as a person in the world.
There's that Czesław Miłosz quote where he's like, when a writer is born into a family, the family is finished. And which I have, like, I think about that quote a lot because I'm like, what, I wish I could ask him what that means. And I've, like, at various points of my life, I've had, like, a different answer to that question. You know, like, does it mean that, like, you know, there's some process of excavation where, like, the family's privacy becomes, like, unprivate, which I think is probably part of it, or that you end up, like, kind of severing yourself from the family to kind of belong to some other community, which I also think is kind of right. But it is, you know, the family is the thing I write about exclusively, and part of that is coming out of the family I came out of, which was, like, this very creative and fractious and occasionally volatile family, and also like a group of people who are constantly challenging me all the time, and that's, like, a generative space for art, and, like, the idea of like being in a space and holding several stories all at once. You know, you're, like, not talking to that cousin, but you're, like, you know what he's thinking about you, and I know what I'm thinking about you, and then we don't have to say it. And that's, like, that feels like a lot of how I think about storytelling, right? Which is, like, what is implicit, what is explicit, what am I going to keep to myself, and what am I going to tell you when I absolutely have to tell you at the last possible moment, which is, like, to my advantage, you know. And that's, like, the whole game of being a novelist.
So we have a lot of great questions from this audience. The first one, Iddo, which of your stories is being made into a film? We should have said that part.
Oh, okay. The story is Debbie's Dream House. Is part of the Jerusalem Beach collection, and it is about a man that his day job is, like, literally, like, creating dreams. We dream at night, and then he uses this ability to manipulate his partner so she won't leave him. So it's a story about, like, in a sense, also relationship in some way.
Stuart mentioned that a book needs redemption, whether that is a reality or the reality or not. Why do we need redemption? That's a deep question.
It's a good question. I don't know that we do. I don't know that we do. I mean, this is, like, a thing I'm always asking myself, like, where does that idea come from? There is, you know, these ideas, these strictures of narratives, ideas of, like, this, of, like, how, of, like, these technologies to talk about storytelling are really old. Like, you can read in Aristotle's Poetics a way of talking about story that is pretty much the way that you could, like, go to film school at Columbia or NYU, and they're talking about story the exact same way, and it's, like, kind of really daunting to be like, oh, like, so in ancient Greece they're having the same class that we're having now, like, it hasn't changed. And so we've inherited these. I mean, so much of, like, these kind of fascinating ideas of psychology, like Jungian psychology of, like, the collective unconscious, like, you know, do we all have these same archetypes in our mind about stories and the stories we're dreaming? And this is like the kind of things that I like spend too much time worrying about, because there is a kind of readerly experience where that redemption doesn't happen and it's dissatisfying. But, you know, a lot of living is also dissatisfying. And so if you're trying to write about life, then, you know, and we're fiction writers, so we're lying all the time. And so, like, where does the honesty come in? I mean, that's the, yeah.
two liars up here. Great liars, actually. So this one actually says Nido on it, so this is for you, Iddo. And someone's asking, what neuroscience studies are you bringing into your writing, and also why Columbia and not an Israeli university? You know they were going to come in with that at the end.
Yeah. So I'll start, like, for me, coming to Columbia, there's a professor that I really wanted to work with. She's Israeli, Daphne Shohami. And also, like, my partner is a journalist, and she got a job here in the U.S., like, as a correspondent of a Israeli TV channel. So for me, it was an opportunity to, like, continue my research through here. And remind me, how's neuroscience? Yeah. So for me, I think it is, like, in many ways, like my first book, Jerusalem Beach, was actually written before I started my undergrad, because in Israel, like, you start older, and a lot of people thought that it's, like, inspired in many ways by it, but in many ways I felt my writing was actually the way of signaling to myself what I should do, like, in college, and I think in many ways it does implement, not in the sense of, like, I once, like, saw, like, a book that is titled, like, how to write a book, a bestseller through, like, neuroscience tips. So that's not the thing that I'm aiming at doing. But I think, like, there is this thought about, like, how there's a lot of things that neuroscience is dealing with about, like, memory and decision making. And I think they're actually also in the core of literature, of what is to be a person in the world. And I think having those questions that I deal with daily helps me in a way of exploring my writing in a way that's more meaningful. I
want to end on the final frontier. This is a ChatGPT question, which would take us to sort of the futuristic. Someone writes, I keep hearing from friends who talk to ChatGPT as a therapist, friend, God, or creative partner. As writers, inventors, and creators, how do you think about this tool and what it suggests or mirrors back to us? And they're listening. The cloud is listening. So the new cloud, not the old one, like in your book.
So I, like, tell my students, I have to do the whole thing with my students. I'm like, don't do ChatGPT to do your work, even though they're all doing it. And
in, like, a writing class.
Well. So, like, for the homeworks, yeah, like, I'm teaching a class on Kafka right now. They have to, like, send me their, like, observations about the work. I'm sure it's computer generated, whatever. I mean, but for the creative work, right now, the kind of creative work that the, like, robots can do is, like, not great, right? But it's, like, pretty mediocre. And so I, again, like, feel kind of freed up, right? Like, there's no, these tools are tools of efficiency, and it's, like, not efficient to be, like, really strange and weird and human, right? Like, or to have childhood trauma. Like, does ChatGPT, I saw that sign at the protest, right? Like, ChatGPT doesn't have childhood trauma. I'm like, well, I do. And so, like, that's where the art is, right? So, like, if we're gonna have some sort of future where the robots are making our, mass entertainment, then great, because there's a whole world of kind of weirdo writers and poets out there right now writing at this moment, and they make really vital art, and that may end up just being where those writers are. There may just be fewer of them because people are getting their entertainment from, their personalized movie studio that's going to make you your personal movie. Maybe that seems like a real efficient way to make a future. It feels really antisocial to me.
I do feel like there's something very, like, Kafka-esque. It's like a short story about ChatGPT and like, you just keep going. I don't know.
But I use this.
It's a free idea for anyone.
But, like, it's they call it a hallucination when it lies to you. Right? When ChatGPT tells you something that's not true, it's called a hallucination. And, I'm experimenting with this as a teacher, and it's like, I'm like, so what questions would I ask in this section of Kafka's The Trial? And it's like, well, you should ask about this thing. And I'm like, well, that's not in the book. You just wrote a new section of The Trial, which I'm sure Kafka is somewhere enjoying is delighting in that fact.
I can just say that, like, personally, I'm not afraid of the day that, like, ChatGPT will write better stories than I will, and I think there may be a day that will happen. But I think the question for me is, like, why do I read literature? And I think like if it's reading the best stories, so yeah, maybe one day there will be technology that will do it better than I do. But I think for me, literature and art in general was always about connecting with other people. It was exploring the consciousness of a person I do not know, that sometimes I love and sometimes makes me angry and sometimes makes me laugh. And in the end of the day, I think like that's something that like, I don't know, maybe people will feel that they want to explore, like how does it feel to be an AI agent? But I think in the core of it, like we're such social creatures, and literature is still the best way of getting into a consciousness of another person, that I think we still don't have the technology to do that, and as long as that's the way it goes, so I think literature still has a place in our world.
I like that, a vaguely hopeful note to end on. I think that's great. Iddo Gefen, Stuart Nadler. We lied, we kept secrets. Thank you to the Jewish Museum, Jewish Book Council. Again, these great books available right over there. Great authors will be right there signing. Thank you all for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.